Morning, everybody. Happy hump day, only 4 minutes late this morning. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox, and today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Hi, Susie.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, remember, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We will do our best to answer them for you as interestingly as we can. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to get the king to come round and tell you what you're supposed to be doing. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on a new regime at Strictly Come Dancing following allegations of physical abuse between professional dancers and their celebrity partners, which has cast rather a shadow over the show in its 20th anniversary year. Now, we did Strictly on the show on Monday, so I'm going to relieve Jason of the task of discussing sequins. And instead, we're going to go to pages 16 and 17, where Donald Trump has made his first public appearance at the Republican National Convention. He didn't say anything. He just waved to the crowd. And the Mirror's man on the spot, Martin Fricker, said he even had the grace to look a bit embarrassed by the roars of the crowd that greeted him. It does take some guts, doesn't it, Jason, to walk out in public just 2 days after someone shot at you, the last time you were in public?
Is it guts, or is he just enjoying the moment and exploiting it as politically as much as he can, Susie?
You cynic.
I'm not cynical at all. He's a politician. He's more cynical than any other politician I've come across. And he's doing exactly, what is beneficial to him. The kind of, he is partly responsible for some of the most appalling rhetoric I've heard from anybody of stoking tensions, of trying to undermine democracy, of creating an environment where of division and hatred. And then trying to pose as the unity candidate. It's kind of, if you think I'm cynical, his actions are even more cynical and quite terrifying as well, Susie. I mean, this guy's a threat to democracy.
Yes, so and he does look now like he's absolutely nailed on, if he wasn't before, to be the next president of the United States. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think that? Do you agree with Jason that this is all very cynical manipulation by Trump? There's even suggestions the whole assassination thing was staged. Don't know why a 20-year-old would do that and have their head blown off just for a lark. But do you agree with Jason? It's all very cynical and he's exploiting this to his own benefit, or do you think it's just that's the way life has fallen out and it does take some bravery to go out on that stage? Now, there were some worrying scenes already at the Republican National Convention, which is where they're going to choose their formal nominee, including the fact that a lot of Trump supporters have adopted his clenched fist and the words "fight, fight, fight," which he used straight after the shooting. Apparently just off the cuff, and if you are a conspiracy theorist, it was all part of the script. Now, it meant that people in a uniform of cowboy hats were all pumping their right fists in the air and chanting aggressively. And if you haven't seen footage of the Nuremberg rallies, I suggest you Google it and then shut yourself in a darkened room, because you're going to need to get over it again afterwards. Jason, are you, and I was thinking the answer probably is yes, but are you worried about the degree of, I suppose, fanaticism which this shooting seems to have engendered? It's just, he had that anyway, but it's stepped up, isn't it?
I mean, it's not a political party, it's a cult, and it's a one-person cult, which is always frightening. I mean, the fanaticism was there before. All of this is done is kind of put rocket boosters under it. And what really worries me, and was what we struggle with so much here, though we have seen elements of it a bit in the UK, is the fact that this guy is totally unsuitable for office. It's not just the congenital lying, it's not just the criminal record. It's the corruption, it's the instigating of an attempt to overthrow the elected government with storming of the Capitol, and it's the denying of what was a clear democratic result. And he's just picked as his vice presidential running mate, JD Vance, or JDOT as they call him, somebody who was one of the deniers of the election result. This is very frightening. And, Trump is, this time he's much better organized when he ran before. He's got a clear plan of what he's going to do when he gets into office. And that is going to be the complete politicization of the civil service. It's going to be using the clout of office to silence or muzzle the judiciary so they cannot intervene if there's a contested election result. These are worrying aspects. And if you care about democracy and you care about an independent judiciary and you care about checks and balances of power, then this guy should not be anywhere near winning. And yet there's a kind of, even more so since the assassination attempt, there's this kind of fervent, kind of almost kind of messianic kind of belief in this man who is fundamentally dangerous. And that worries me. And I understand why. I understand, look, you can look at Joe Biden, you can see, look, clearly he's too old and clearly he shouldn't be running and clearly he's flawed. And, he's given Trump kind of a free ride here by being the wrong candidate himself. But that doesn't excuse the kind of way that millions of Americans are accepting somebody without question. In fact, it's worse than that. They are kind of, they're actively kind of invested him in like some, as I say, like some kind of cult hero, when he shouldn't be there. And it's really, really very scary.
It is. And there's a lot of talk as well, because he survived the assassination attempt, about being chosen by God, which just feeds into that. And God and religion, evangelism, has such a bigger impact across the pond. It's far more prevalent in the politics and in the general cultural identity. We're much more secular in this country and have been for centuries. Remember, America's only 200 odd years old in its current format, and they haven't really ever questioned their founding principles. As a result, they haven't had this Renaissance moment where they go, what were we doing? Do we need to keep doing that or not? They just keep ploughing on with this puritanical sort of attitude that they're chosen by God somehow. Now, Mike says Trump is now nailed on to be president following this weekend and the Biden issue. If his words are true, he'll dismantle all checks and balances in the US. They're using The Handmaid's Tale as a guidebook. There's lots of stuff they're talking about rolling back. The plan is called Project 2025, isn't it, Jason? That was the long plan that his kind of team had to what they were going to do when they got in. That was partly because when they got in last time, they didn't know what to do. They weren't very good with the levers of power. They had been able to make some Supreme Court appointments, but that was kind of, the rest of it was just, a Sharpie pen and Sunny Delight, and they didn't know what to do. But this time they've got this plan in place. And he's picked his running mate. It's a man called, as you said, James Vance, who thinks JD Vance, however we're pronouncing it sounds so much tougher. He previously called Trump human heroin, but is now his biggest cheerleader. And yesterday he joked, I think it was a joke anyway, that Britain was an Islamist country now that Keir Starmer's been elected. Of course, famous Islamist being married to a Jewish lady. Now, Jason, Keir's probably going to have to deal with these people. I'm sure he'll do so in a grown-up way, puts Britain's best interests ahead of, whatever loathing he may feel for some of this in the pit of his stomach. Brenda says Trump's going to milk this to his advantage. I don't think there's anything he never has, actually, Brenda. But how difficult is it going to be for any nation to create a relationship that's in any way meaningful with what's going to be a selfish, isolationist, potentially aggressive administration?
So this is the real key issue for Starmer. It's going to be Ukraine, and followed by that by NATO, but primarily Ukraine. And I mean, Trump is kind of ambivalent about Ukraine at best, but Vance, as we've just been talking about, he was one who led attempts in the Senate to block Biden's aid bill for military and financial support for Ukraine. So he's really kind of like, he's not ambivalent, he's kind of being actively hostile I mean, he's a very much an American first. Has talked about there shouldn't be writing any more blank checks for Ukraine. That is obviously going to be, you know, the main flashpoint, because somehow leaders in the West, Starmer, Schultz, Macron, Meloni, have got to keep Trump on side for Ukraine. Now it's difficult because, as you just reel off those names. Meloni's in quite a strong position. Starmer's in a strong position. Macron is now in lame duck territory. Schultz is incredibly weak. You could extend the list to look at Justin Trudeau in Canada. He's looking like he's on his way out as well. So there's a kind of absence of leadership. There's so that's the main problem. Against that, interestingly, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has been quite cute. Well, one person he's actually made quite good headway with and struck up a relationship is with Vance. And he's praised Vance's book called Hillbilly Elegy, which is about coming from a working class background and making it up. And Lammy's said it's one of the best books he's read. And they do have a working relationship, which is kind of slightly counterintuitive. So, I think Starmer's going to be a pragmatist on this. He has no choice. They have, it was interesting. He rang Trump rather than send him a message after the assassination attempt. So he's clearly thinking ahead. But the problem with this, which all leaders found when Trump was last in office, is they could never work out whether you try and hug him close or you stand up to him. So Theresa May that awful image of the hand holding. She got somewhere. She got a commitment on NATO from him from trying to hug him close. Merkel just went, I'm having nothing to do with this guy. He's out. It's just too unpleasant and too awkward and too irrational and too erratic and too mercurial. And which one works best? I don't know. I mean, he's a very transactional guy, Trump. But there's no correct answer to this problem. And as you say, because he's such a maverick, you can't actually predict what he's going to do.
Exactly. It's like handing a nuclear weapon, isn't it? Steve says, I'm going to have Steve's comment back up because I'd forgotten entirely what he just said. But anyway, so we'll get it in a minute. Steve made a comment anyway. We'll get back to Steve in a minute. But one of the things that's going to be happening is that we have recently, quite a while ago actually, agreed to renew the Trident missile system, our nuclear deterrent. Now, we own the warheads, I think it is, but America has the missiles. And we kind of share, right? And we rent them off them and maintain the warheads ourselves. But we've got our own submarines, but we have to rent the missiles actually from the Americans because there's so much cooperation. Steve says it seems like America is sleepwalking into a dictatorship. Very scary. But when we have those new missiles, when they come online, which should be at some point in the next 5-10 years, we're going to have to test them. We're going to have subcritical explosions in the Nevada desert, probably with the Americans. They want to keep selling us Trident because it's worth a lot of money. They need us as allies. So they're also going to have to deal with us to some extent. But we can't.
Some things are, but there are the building blocks of relationships there, which are going to be, you don't say necessarily fine, but, you've got AUKUS, which is the American, UK, Australian trade pact. And I can, that will probably continue. And I don't see why it wouldn't do. So on that side of things, I'm less concerned. It's more on the really big picture stuff of, will Trump carry out his threat to just withdraw funding from NATO? And if he does so, how does NATO progress without American support? Will he try and cut a deal with Putin on Ukraine and therefore undermine the Western alliance on that? Will he go, as he did before, studs in the Middle East, completely backing Netanyahu, and therefore risk the conflagration of that already really troubled situation? And those are the bits where we just don't know the answer to, but he's given indications that he could do all three of those things.
It's hard to see, though, how America First ties in with a resurgent Russia, which means you've got to fund Ukraine in some way, even though it doesn't really feed into your base. It seems counterintuitive when you're in the short term, but in the long term, if you don't, you got Putin and Russia and the return of the Soviet bloc. It's not really in America's best interests, one would have thought. So they're going to have to deal with that a little bit. But also, I genuinely don't think he's going to be leaving at the end of that second term. He's constitutionally required to, can't serve more than second terms, but he did joke last time that maybe he'd rewrite the constitution, and I would not put it past him. Put that one to a vote, especially in the early days, maybe when he can get away with it. So we'll have to just see, won't we, if he manages to stay in the White House longer than he's supposed to this time. I suspect he might. Now, it's the main story in Britain today, and it is the formal opening of Parliament with a King's Speech, a process which has a lot of ceremony and rigmarole, but in which Labour will set out its legislative agenda for the next while. And this is the first time many of us are really seeing anything much about what its plans actually are, putting some meat on those bones. During the general election, Jason, we didn't get told very much. It was all very much, general wishes and urges. Can you briefly sort of sum up with what Keir Starmer's actually going to do now? Do we know?
So, well, he's going to do a lot because there's 35 odd bills, which is a massive amount. Whether they have the time to get all those through is a different question. But the big kind of ticket numbers are the planning reforms. So this is going to be ripping up the planning laws to allow speedier and quicker developments, primarily for housing, but also for things like kind of, wind farms, solar power farms, etc., business developments, expansion into the green belt and what they call the grey belt. So these are areas of green belt where actually are, they're not used for protecting the environment and are not used at the moment for building on. That's quite contentious. So you've got the war of the NIMBYs, which is going to be a bit of a flashpoint. But Starmer's been quite clear. He was upfront about this before the election. It was a manifesto commitment. So there's, it's not like he's going to be in a secret about he's going to do this. So you've got that. Then you've got the creation of Great British Energy, which is this kind of new umbrella body, which I gather, according to the Labour press, is going to create 650,000 new jobs over the next decade.
How?
Yeah, well, these are good questions, Susie. Let's keep going. We've got the nationalisation of the railways, but I think obviously you can see there. So I think that's going to be very popular. And you've got this rate of devolution. That's more powers to the metro mayors, etc., etc. So those are kind of the big ticket ones, plus bills on everything from trying to kind of migration to reforming the House of Lords to there's even a bill to actually make sure there's no female bishops in the House of Lords. These are so and then things which
legislate.
Sorry,
can you legislate for more female bishops?
That's what they're doing.
I thought that one was up to Anyway.
I mean, a couple of things interestingly have been held over from the Sunak government. The smoking legislation has been brought back to bring out eradicate smoking, and the football governance bill. So, I mean, this is a statement of intent. This is, but it's a very weighty package. It plays to this narrative that Britain's being held back by a lack of drive and imagination and will, and that Labour can start the process of fixing things. But as you said, there's a lot of questions here. How quickly can they work? How quickly will we see the benefits of what they're going to do? And are they, is it addressing the issues which really matter to people?
Exactly, and they've got to as well. They've got this like 2-track thing they've got to do. They've got to start the really difficult stuff that's going to take 5 or 10 years now, while they've got the honeymoon period. But they've also got to have some very short-term, quick wins, so they can have stuff to throw out and look like they've definitely got something they can harvest. Before they get to local elections, national elections. It's all going to be a bit sticky. Now, if anyone can remember, it was very similar in the first days of the new Labour government in 1997. They didn't say much in the election for fear of sort of starting Tory attacks about tax and spend and so on. They were criticised for that. Then they weren't criticised for not doing enough in that first term, for being a bit too meek, even though he had a massive majority. And Tony Blair always felt that was terribly unfair, but that's what they were criticised for at the time. Do you think he is going to follow that same pattern as he has up to now? He's followed the playbook, really. Perhaps or do you think maybe, under the influence of big party figures, people like maybe the Metro Mayor, Andy Burnham, is he going to be more radical than that as well?
I think one of the things people realise, haven't quite appreciated, he's kind of quiet revolutionary. I mean, if somebody has said, the next Labour government's going to kind of like renationalise the railways. People are going, God, that's a bit socialist, isn't it? And
It's a
yet,
bit what?
yeah, and yet he kind of just like smuggled through some quite radical policies without people realising. And it's a great bit of political salesmanship in many ways. So I think, you know, but I know he gets criticised a lot from the left for not being radical enough, and we will come on to the areas where I think, you know, like the 2-child benefit cap, but perhaps a Labour government of all governments should be doing more. But actually, this is probably a more radical, far-reaching reforms than people have actually quite grasped yet. I'm kind of wrapped up in this guise of reasonableness.
Yeah. And what do you think, everybody? What would you like to see in the King's speech? What do you want Labour to tackle first? Is planning and access to housing the most important thing to you? Is it the NHS? Is it something else entirely? Get into the comments and let us know. What would you like Keir Starmer to be doing on day one? Because he's having to ask the King to turn up and tell him what to say. And we're going to be listening to the King talking about, I don't know, public service and service to the country and a country first, party second, all that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting today to see what's in that speech. And Hillsborough Law is going to be one of the things probably that go onto the statute books. Now that is a new bit of legislation which will create what's called a duty of candour for public officials and hopefully a public advocate, which means basically that police, politicians, civil servants are not allowed to lie. They face jail if they're caught lying. And that victims of tragedy would get a state-funded legal representative. So if you've got to go and there's parity of arms, really. If you, for example, you have to go and sue, I don't know, the NHS or the post office, right? That you and them have the same number of lawyers, and that you don't have to sell your house and fundraise in order to get to that point. But what's not been mentioned at all in the past week, and had only a wee mention in the manifesto actually, are the many scandals and cover-ups we've seen come to light in the past few years, and that we'll all need dealing with. So we've got the postmasters who still haven't been fully exonerated. There's contaminated blood who have not had their compensation, and there is a decision supposed to be due before the August the 24th, I think. There's the nuclear veterans who are just launching their own court case and are waiting desperately to have some actual response from the Ministry of Defence about their missing medical records from the Cold War. There's Windrush, there's Grenfell, there's Orgreave. When are we going to hear anything about those? Because I suspect a lot of those campaigners have, like me for the past week, been banging their head against a desk going, why haven't you mentioned this?
Yeah, and I, you know, but well, for first instance, look, these are all legacy issues from the Conservatives, and they should have been dealt with by the previous administration. So you have to kind of, you know, this is Labour's inherited this kind of large in tray of injustice, and you know, I think we have to be fair to them and say, look, they can't necessarily deal with everything immediately because for problems which they've inherited rather than created themselves. On saying that, we're pretty damn sure there's a Hillsborough Bill law in the King's speech. I think there's kind of some very interesting bits of legislation coming down on reforming the Equality Act with a particular view of making it, I don't exactly know the mechanics of this, but making it kind of more reflective of Britain's diverse society. I think these could be good things. There's a large emphasis on mental health. So in terms of the specifics you've mentioned, I don't know the answer to all these questions yet, and we'll find out at 11:30. But I think a lot of them are being addressed. But the question always with these, Susie, is they could put these things in the King's speech. It's then for them to decide which bits of legislation they introduce to Parliament, and there's only a limited amount of time to get these bills through. And although Labour has a huge majority, so most of them should sail through quite comfortably and reasonably speedily. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good law not to have enough scrutiny, but it's the order which they decide to do them. And some may just not make it from lack of time.
Yeah, it may well be that something like the Hillsborough Law be coming in. They're hoping that sorts out a lot of the other things sort of precipitate out of that. I think it's called Martin's Law as well. There's a law
that's going to be in it as well. Yeah,
that's about in the name, I think, of someone who was killed at the Manchester Arena bombing.
Yes, that's after Martin, and his mother met Rishi Sunak on the day he called the general election, and Sunak promised her that Martin's Law would be introduced. And then 2 hours later announced he was going to hold a general election. Well, I'm told a good authority that is definitely also in the King's speech.
Yes, well, if he was indeed the Labour sleeper agent that many people accused him of, he was just telling you the truth. It was going to be legislation, and again with the smoking thing, it just kind of proves really whose side Rishi was on, perhaps all the way through. Busted.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait for those documents to be released under the Public Records Act, won't we? Now, what do you think, everybody? Is there anything else that is not in the King's Speech that you would like to be in there? And is there anything that you're worried about that's not in it? Should there be more stuff in it that would affect you, that you'd like to see sorted out? Let us know. Get into the comments. Now, there are some things that aren't in it, like, as you already mentioned, Jason, lifting this cap on the benefit cap rather, on 2 children. And Jason, can you tell us why does Labour feel so split about this? They were very anti this cap in opposition, but there's no appetite whatsoever, it would seem, for lifting it now.
Right. Now, cap is, just to explain what happens. If you have 2 or more children, you get no benefit or social security support towards them. Now, there's a lot of large families out there. Since this cap was introduced by George Osborne, it's affected like an estimated 1.5 million children. The number goes up each year. If you poll it, it's very popular with the public. They go, well, parents aren't responsible enough. They shouldn't get any, it's up to them if they want to have more children, and they can't afford to look after them. They shouldn't have children attitude. But the problem is, it's also probably the main driver of child poverty at the moment. And it's a very iniquitous policy because it's causing children to suffer because of decisions made by their parents. And for whatever attitude you may have towards the parents, I think most people would agree that actually no child should suffer because their parents of what their parents have decided to do or not to do. And no child really should be held back and not get the best start in life and not get the support they need and not get the food they need because of the decisions made by their parents.
And even so, some people are living on benefits and relying on us not because of any choice of their own, but because they've got cancer and can't work, because something else has happened, because they were making terribly responsible decisions when they had their children, but after that point, something's got cocked up. We could all be there, couldn't we? Yeah.
And there's a kind of, you think if the Labour Party's, Howard Wilson said the Labour Party is a moral crusader, it's nothing. And if Labour is still a moral force, then you would have thought that lifting this or axing this cap would be one of the best acts they could do as a statement of how they do want a more equal, socially just society. But their argument is, and I'm not sure I necessarily buy this, but their argument is, look, we're not going to make promises we can't afford. It will cost 2.5 billion a year to lift this cap. We don't have that money at the moment. And when, we're the party of responsible finances now. The alternative to that is, they are going to spend next year £5 billion freezing fuel duty. You have political choices. You could, give money to motorists, or you can give it to children in poverty. And it's getting a head of steam. I think that, the Lib Dems and the SNP are talking about joining forces to put down a motion. It will get defeated, but it made us peel off a few of left-wing Labour MPs in support. John McDonnell, for example. Interestingly, Nigel Farage during the election campaign called for the 2-child benefit cap to be axed. I mean, he knows,
doesn't he?
Yeah. So it's not. It's one of these ones where you could think, during the honeymoon period of Starmer, it's probably that he can probably ride it out. I think the longer it goes on, if there's a rise in child poverty under his prime ministership, then it's going to become more problematic.
Yeah, I think they're probably banking on the fact that if they can get the economy growing and take credit for that, and they can lift children out of poverty without having to spend that money. Because I think even if they did get the cash further down the road, they got $2.5 billion spare. They probably wouldn't spend it on that for all the political reasons you've just said, which is that the public will think you're giving feckless families cash and you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, just it's Gordon Brown is one of the main people advocating for axing. Interestingly, the Work and Pensions Minister Stephen Timms, before he went into government, had called for his cap to go. It's going to be an internal row as much as an external one for Labour. This.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to see before we move on to good news is that because these got 412 MPs, They've only got 100 or so government jobs. And that means 300 odd people who don't have much to do, who, a lot of whom, of course, owe him a lot of loyalty because he's got them into Parliament and they're feeling great at the moment. But over time, can rebel and will rebel because they'll think, well, I can vote against this because it's not going to matter. It's still going to get through, but I can make a point to my constituents, whether it's about Gaza or the benefit cap or something else. And there's going to be a lot more rebellions, aren't there?
And I'm glad you mentioned Gaza, because actually the other thing which Labour's should be aware of is where they lost votes amongst the Muslim community. The 2-child benefit cap was as strong, if not stronger, motive as Gaza. They have large families and a lot of them live in a lot of poverty, and it's not, there's a tendency to say the Muslim community was just a single issue. They weren't. It was actually multiple issues, and that was one of them.
Well, we have to see, won't we, about the amendments that tabled after the King's speech and who's tabling them and how many people are supporting them, because that might indicate where things are going to go. And if they've got any sense about party management, they would try and, bring some of that stuff in when they actually get through the process. There may even be some about nuclear veterans. Watch this space. Now, so they've got this stuff. We've gone through the King's speech. We've done that bit. Move on to the next bit of the script. Thank you, Jason, for all of that. Thank you. I just want to say, Richard on Twitter says some things that they could do are free and efficacious, like making teacher working conditions with all their reports and admin to be improved the way they want it to be, and not necessarily the politician's next big bright idea. Wouldn't that be nice? Actually asking people what they need at work one of these days. Now, we have managed to find some good news in the world for you, and here it is. I think. Is it coming? Hello? Good news? Anybody? Have we found any? Shall I just do it without, I think...
we don't need anybody else.
The trailer, so we'll do it now. Now, Ryan Collard could be forgiven for having a little bit of me time. He was diagnosed with stage 3 testicular cancer in 2017, the same year his twin was diagnosed with the same disease. He became sterile. He thought he'd never have children. But then one of the pupils who was due to join his class, a girl called Kali Raghavan, contracted leukemia. And for her, he just went the extra mile. He took treat bags to her door when she missed them being handed out in class. He sent her videos of all her friends. He helped her and talked to her when she came back to school when she was struggling, and really went just the extra mile for her. Her mum nominated him for Teacher of the Year. He's now also had his own son, thanks to IVF. Just brilliant by the NHS all round. He and Callie are now both in remission. Jason, is this proof you think that, well, putting yourself out for someone else does have its own rewards? A little public acknowledgement can help too.
What I love about this is it actually shines the light on how many teachers out there do so much additional work, and just kind of like, and in this case, it's incredibly heartfelt, and it's lovely, and it's the kind of the sharing of an experience and that kind of investment in somebody. But it happens all the time on a much lots of little incidents. I mean, I remember I make my living from reading and writing. I didn't read and write till I was 8. It was only because I had a really good teacher who set me extra homework that I learned how to read and write. It's like these tiny things, which you did outside the school hours. They really matter.
They do. And it's all about someone who gives you that sort of inspiration, in the sense that you can do something perhaps that you're struggling with.
Miss Hughes, if you're listening, thank you very much.
Yes. I was talking to my daughter's teacher about something that was upsetting my daughter yesterday, and the teacher started crying just because she cared so much. I thought it was absolutely... She set me off then, I thought it was lovely. So teachers do care, and they don't take 6 weeks holidays. And interestingly, just before we go, I will say that as far as I can tell, Parliament's not going to be having a long holiday this summer either. Keir Starmer's making them come back early and working Fridays, and just generally, the last Parliament, they were finishing on Wednesday afternoon, weren't they? It's a
little bit Cromwellian, isn't it? He's going to be cancelling Christmas next. It's quite frightening.
Yes, they're all going to have to...
We're in a new Puritan age of Starmerism.
Yes, they're going to be in class until Friday. The bell goes, and that's that. Right. Thank you, Jason, for taking us through that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We'll let you go now. And we'll see you all again on Monday, everybody, for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, take care. Tatty bye.